I had my partner over for the night in my dorm. The hall is known for having a lot of paranormal activity, but I'd never put too much faith in the idea since I know people just like to be scared. Anyways, he passed out cold. I woke up in the middle of the night or the early morning when I saw an elderly man standing beside the bed. He was tall, had grey hair, a beer belly, and looked familiar somehow. I passed out again and had a dream about the same man. We were walking through the forest that borders my school. He was talking about really random things, like the trees or the grass. I kept asking his name and he never answered. I finally remembered the name Robert, and that's when the dream ended. When my partner and I had both awoken up, I asked him what his grandfather's name was. He replied, Robert. I kinda just sat there. I told him everything and he wasn't shocked at all. He said that his mother always told him that his grandpa was watching over him, and so chances were he was watching over me as well. This was a shock because not only did I never meet his grandpa or know this, but my partner is not spiritual in any sense of the word. I had never seen anyone else's dead relatives ever before, and this was the first and only time so far. It was strange, but I think because I have such a strong connection to my partner, and hearing stories about his grandfather and how similar he was to mine, I'm sure it formed some kind of bridge. When I was 10 years old, we went to live in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. Great weather, wonderful beaches. We had a nice large garden, and the street we lived in was full of flowered trees. An idyllic setting where it's hard to imagine darkness. But it was there where I lived the most terrifying experience of my life. There was a girl with us on the school bus. Let's say Elle. She was 2 years older than me. Her big sister was 15, and everybody agreed she was beautiful, more or less ignoring the feelings of her younger sister. No wonder I was always quite shy and seemed introverted. No matter how much people preferred the looks of the older sister, Elle was beautiful. She had amazing long legs and a very sweet smile. Her huge dark eyes seemed to spark in her face. Elle started talking with me on the bus, and we became closer. Even her mom said she used to prefer younger friends because she felt somehow intimidated by people of her own age. One day, Elle invited me to her house. We lived on the same street, no more than 3 or 4 blocks away. I remember thinking how beautiful the street was, colourful with petals from the trees on its side. Her house was nice, but mostly what I liked was the idea of having a teenager as a friend. Elle, her older sister, and I went to her room and started playing cards, sitting cross-legged on the floor. It was a nice room, shady, with shelves of games and books against the wall. We were having fun for a while, when she looked towards me and told me I was cheating. I told her I wasn't, and we kept on playing. I thought it was a dumb joke, because I was focused on my cards and not nearly looking at hers. Then again, she looks to my side, her face getting really annoyed, and repeats, I told you to stop cheating. I denied, indignant, and looked puzzled at her sister. Her sister shrugged, as surprised as me. The third time, Elle gave an angry glance, but I realised she wasn't looking at me, but just beside me. Stop cheating. I felt mortified, and the older sister started arguing that she saw I wasn't cheating. We expected an answer, but Elle's head lifted toward the ceiling, and then her eyes rolled up. I could just see the whites of her huge eyes highlighted by the darkness of her ebony skin. Her arms started shaking up and down. We heard a hoarse voice coming from inside her mouth. Get me out of here. In one jump, his sister and I were standing, hearts pounding, panicked. Elle kept on repeating, get me out of here, with this strange voice as we ran to the door. I really wanted to run away, but was too afraid to leave the room and to leave her sister. His sister started shouting, Mom, Dad, please come, please. I stopped thinking, only feeling horror, and I also started calling for Mom and Dad. I felt surprised at my own voice and my absurd call. For a second, I blushed thinking about calling Mom and Dad when my parents were blocks away. Elle's parents arrived, running. The dad ran to his child, still on the floor, blank-eyed, begging with this awful voice to get her out of here. The mother stopped at the threshold, her eyes wide opened. The dad called Elle's name, shook her, but nothing changed. He grabbed her by the elbows and lifted her. He wanted to put her on her feet, react somehow. This was the worst moment, and the image of what happened still haunts me so many years later. He lifted her on the air by the elbows, and her legs kept casually crossed in the air. The man was strong, and I guess at this moment full of adrenaline. She was tall, with the body of a young woman, but still, she was a 12-year-old kid, so maybe she wasn't very heavy. Still, seeing this scared man holding his daughter in the same position she was before, while sitting on the floor, just horrified me. He put her back on the floor, and she finally reacted. Her muscles, her face, seemed to suddenly relax, and she had this surprised look on her face when she asked smoothly what was going on. Then, I just remember things going very fast. The mother took me to the living room as she called my parents, asking me to pick up. The older sister was crying after the shock. The dad trying to calm her and Elle, who didn't seem to quite understand what was going on. My dad arrived in a few moments, and I felt so terribly relieved. We went home, and I kept on shaking while I told my parents what happened. My dad said it was probably a seizure, and tried reassuring me. It somehow worked. I managed to rationalize what I saw. Still, I kept on shaking for a while and expected to see her on the floor, cross-legged, hands shaking and asking to get her out of there at every dark corner of the house. The next day, Elle didn't go to school, to my huge relief. I didn't think it would have been able to look at her. In fact, I even avoided looking at her sister. My parents had talked to hers and told me she was having medical exams to find out what kind of seizure it was. Even talking about her made me very nervous. 1 week or so later, my mom woke me up at dawn because I'd promised I'd go jogging with her. Fortunately, my mom's jogging didn't last more than a couple of days. We started running in the nice warmth before the sun rose. We arrived near Elle's house. I felt so terrified. I just grabbed my mom's arm. I wasn't able to stop staring at the house. And even though my mom kept telling me what had happened to my friend was just a health problem, I just imagined her getting her out of the house. Her huge eyes turned towards the stars and the deep voice coming out of her throat. A few days later, some friends and neighbours came to our house, asking for help. Elle was lost. She had taken her bike and left for a little ride 2 hours before. Many people were walking around the neighbourhood, calling her name. I felt my heart pounding. I was genuinely scared for her. She could have had an accident, a seizure. But I was also scared of finding her, crouched in an unexpected place and ready to ask me to get her out of there. The search was not very long, because after half an hour, she appeared, pedalling in the middle of the street, covered with mud. Her eyes stared at the emptiness, and it took 2 or 3 people to stop her. Her mom ran, hugged her crying. Suddenly, Elle reacted, looking at all of us, astonished, and asking what was going on. My mom took me to the house. She said Elle was back and there was no sense in bothering her. Her parents told mine in an evening call that she was fine, but didn't even recall going out of her house, even less where she had been. She wasn't hurt, that's what counted. She didn't go back to school for the rest of the term. It took me a while to feel better when I went near her house. Then vacations arrived, and little by little I felt less terrified about the memory. My parents were right. She probably did have some kind of seizure, and after being medicated, she would be perfectly fine. And when we went back to school, I was totally reassured and could even say hi to Elle's sister with a smile. Elle didn't go back to school, and her parents said she was at a hospital. 6 months later, we had left the wonderful country. One of the things I remembered most over the years, more accurately than the long walks at the Botanic Park, the days at the beach and the endless bike rides, was still Elle's blank face, while her arms shook and she repeated her scary litany. Years later, I decided to study psychology and graduated. I remember so many cases we've seen, and I realised what had happened with Elle. She seemed more like a hebephrenic psychosis than just seizures. I had the final explanation of the horror that had haunted me years ago. I had always been very rational, but at this time of my life, my skepticism was at its top. I always had to find explanations for everything that had to be coherent with science. Needless to say, I'm atheist. I loved questioning the hardest cases of psychological trouble, especially if they had any explanation I could see as superstitious. I had a friend with 20 years of experience as a psychologist, with many patients and quite a trajectory. We were just chatting about interesting cases, and I told him what had happened to Elle. I told him I was pretty sure it had to be psychosis, but I wanted his opinion. He looked straight into my eyes and said he didn't think so. I insisted on differential diagnosis, explaining how it couldn't be any other mental disease. I spare you all the specific gibberish. He asked me if before this episode there had been any other signs of psychosis, not understanding humour, autistic episodes maybe. Not that I knew. Then he asked me a weird question. What did we all feel at the moment? Pure horror was my answer. His diagnosis, even though it had nothing to do with our studies or profession, was possession. Rare, but he had seen it before. Nevertheless, that's another story. One night, I woke up. There was a strange smell, something like smoke. I sat on the bed, scared. I stood up, smelling, looking for the source of the smell. When I got in front of my older daughter's bed, I saw a cloud of grey smoke over her. I shouted for my partner to come and help me find the fire. We looked all over her bedspread and the blankets. Under the bed, there was nothing. But we both could see the smoky cloud. I asked him if it could come from the kitchen, the chimney of my library. I was wrapping my kid on the blanket in case we had to leave the house, and ran to get my second child ready, when he came back and told me there was no fire. I asked him if he hadn't smelled it or seen it. He said he saw it, but there was no smell at all. I couldn't smell it anymore either. The cloud of smoke we both had clearly seen had vanished. At least, we both had seen it. I checked the house once more before going back to bed. Then again another night, a weeknight around 9. The girls and I were still chatting and playing upstairs. We stopped at once when we heard 3 loud knocks at the upstairs bedroom door. I couldn't imagine who that could be for a minute. Then I obviously thought of the 2 persons who had the keys and lived in the city, my aunts and the nanny. My aunt never got to go to the house without calling before, but I thought she might have had an argument with my mom. My nanny could also have had a terrible problem. Anyway, the only possibility was it was someone close and distressed. I asked, "Who is it?" No answer. I asked again, louder. Nothing. Alright, the other possibility, it was a burglar. What kind of burglar would have knocked at the 2nd-story door? Cynical one. Knocking at the door would be like a stupid joke or intended to scare us. Okay, if there was someone trying to attack us, sooner or later, they would break up the cathedral glass, open the door and hurt us. I shushed the girls and told them to hide under the large bed. I took an iron bar I always kept under my bed, a knife, and opened the door, with the clear idea of fighting whomever it was. I opened the door abruptly. No one was there. I turned on the stairs light and shouted once more, asking who it was. No answer. I came back to the bedroom, telling my girls I was going downstairs to check, and meanwhile they should start calling the cops. I walked down the stairs and checked every single corner of every single room. feeling my arms tight around the iron bar. There was no one. There wasn't either any trace of someone having entered the house. The episode was somehow the beginning of the end. One day, I felt the urge to go to the laundry room on a Sunday afternoon and found the iron on, really hot. I turned it off and asked the maid about it the next day, but she insisted she would never have forgotten to unplug it. Even more, if she had forgotten since Friday night, we would have noticed a smell and there would probably have been a fire. Seemed logical, but I wasn't sure until the end of the month arrived and the electricity bill had no extra charges whatsoever, nor the next month. Time went by. I had more and more insomnia and felt depression was back to stay. The maid left. The nanny got more and more scared because she heard someone whisper her name behind her ear more and more often. She decided to quit, and I had no choice but to take some time off, stay at home and try to take care of everything. I only accepted work very early in the morning, so the kids wouldn't be alone. Noises above the rooftop scared the girls, even though the friend ghost was apparently there reassuring my younger child. Cats went crazy at times, staring at something I couldn't see. It was too much. More and more suicidal thoughts on my head. I couldn't go on. Getting rid of the spirits. My partner was very anguished and decided we needed a solution. I had heard the mother of a producer I used to work with was supposed to be a medium, so we decided to call her. The lady asked us not to eat meat nor have sex for a week before she would be home. I was able to deal with the no sex part, but meat was one of the rare things I enjoyed, and I didn't give up on that. The lady arrived, and when we asked if we had followed her instructions, I was honest. I guess I secretly wanted her to say, "Too bad, can't work with you then." The idea of getting rid of all the spirits, all of them, meant the ghost of my love would also go away. I guess that was something that kept holding me on. Still, she visited the house, saying how bad the vibes were. She started burning plants and scented wood all over the place. And once she got in my library, she said it was time to close portals. My little one stepped in front of her. "If you do that, my daddy won't be able to come back anymore." Her dad, my partner, looked at her, puzzled. My little one kept on staring at the lady, making her visibly uncomfortable. I was wondering what her idea was about the ghost and herself. Anyway, we continued the ceremony. At the end, the lady advised us to go somewhere else for a few days or weeks. My partner said we could go to the town where we lived, in which I had a little country house. I loved that house, especially because of the large garden and woods. So did my children. Still, I felt there was no way I would abandon my place at this moment. Apparently, my little one felt the same because she said, in a way I was unable to believe from a 3-year-old kid, "Mom, don't listen to this lady. She's crazy." The lady kept on looking at my kid. She then told me this child is an evil spirit. That was enough. The lady had to go. We closed the door behind her. Nothing had changed in the house, besides the smoky smell of plants all over the place. Since things continued more and more often against everyone who entered the house, including my partner, we still felt there was something to do. I couldn't keep having insomnia, visions. Even the cats were upset with the doorbell ringing, lights on and off, music changing by itself. We all talked as a family. We had to put an end to it. The shaman. So, my partner contacted a shaman. I felt a terrible animosity against him, since I heard him on the phone, but still, we had to do something. When he arrived, I didn't like his cocky attitude, but was polite. He asked us to sit in a circle around a charcoal incense burner. He muttered many things while turning around us with a scented stick of wood burning in his hand. Suddenly, my older daughter started bleeding from the nose. Her nose was dripping so hard, even the shaman seemed impressed. I ran to get some Kleenex and a wet towel to try and stop the bleeding. The shaman kept on making circles around her head with worried eyes. I kept on trying my earthly ways to stop my kid's nose bleeding. Suddenly, the bleeding stopped. I felt a strange change in the house. My little one, for once, was quiet and calm. I was horribly tired and, unexpectedly, I felt nothing but gratefulness for the shaman. He went around the house, cleansing every room with scented smoke. Even before he finished, I went to bed and fell asleep like a baby. Now, my house is very peaceful now. One night, I dreamt of my late boyfriend. He told me he had to go, but would still be there visiting us. In my dream, I cried a lot, hugging him. He told me not to forget every second is infinite, and instead of crying, we should just enjoy being together. I held him, kissed him, but still woke up crying. Sometimes, on very particular occasions, the bell still rings upstairs, and a few times, he appears in my dreams. I've learnt to let go, but it took time. And tears. I still have insomnia from time to time, but now I know how to take it calmly. My daughters are growing up nicely. Life is good. I hope afterlife is good too for most people.
Since it was a cold day and we didn't want to go outside, but we had to let our dog Frisbee go outside to do her business. After a while, Frisbee didn't come back to the door yet, so Vivi went outside to check on her. This part will be from what he told me, and I'll recall it like from what he told me. Vivi went outside and is calling Frisbee, only to hear her barking, but slightly faint. Vivi follows her barking to the middle of the backyard, only to look down and see Frisbee in a deep hole. Now, we do have a big backyard, but this hole was never here before. Vivi kneels down and reaches for Frisbee to try and pull her out, only for him to slip on the snow and fall in himself, getting stuck himself. Vivi tried to climb out, but he couldn't get a proper grip on the snow and kept falling back down into the hole. He then picked up Frisbee and managed to lift Frisbee out of the hole, then gently pushed her away from the edge. Frisbee, being a puppy, kept trying to jump back into the hole, but Vivi sternly told her no, and Frisbee stopped. This is when I started getting worried about why Vivi and Frisbee hadn't come back inside yet, because it was cold and I didn't want to get in trouble because Vivi caught a cold. So I went outside to find them and started calling for both of them. I saw Frisbee running in my direction, but not Vivi, and approached Frisbee. Instead of coming to me, Frisbee turned around and ran back to where the hole was, guiding me back to Vivi. That's when I heard Vivi calling out for help, and I called back to him. Vivi suddenly warns me to be careful, or I'd end up falling in myself, because we were the only kids at home, besides our dad, who was inside the house, and wouldn't be able to hear us calling for help. So I carefully creep forward until I can see him standing in the hole, and I ask him how he got in there. He tells me how he fell in while reaching in to get Frisbee, but was able to lift her out. I knelt down and reached down to pull him out. While pulling him, I felt myself slowly sliding down myself, and I had to let him go, but told him I was going to get something to help him get out. I ran into the garage and pulled out our plastic kid shovels, ran back to the edge of the hole and handed him the shovel. I told him to make footholds so he could climb out, and he did just that. Even with the footholds, it was still too hard for him to climb out. So I took a hold of the shovel blade, I'm glad it was plastic and not metal, told him to hold onto the handle, and I pulled outwards while he climbed out with his foothold. After getting him out and grabbing Frisbee, we quickly rushed inside before Vivi caught a cold, and gave them both something warm to eat and drink, so they could warm up, and after winter passed, we went and looked outside, only to not see the hole in the backyard anymore. We waited until the next winter to see if the hole would appear again. We even used the same shovel to poke around the area where the hole was, and couldn't find it anymore. We were too confused and never told our parents about it, because they might not believe me. This happened a few days ago. It's nothing big, but I want to document the things that happen at my house when they happen. I guess I'm writing this more for me than you, and will probably go long as I like putting in details. We've been renovating our upstairs, turning the space into a kid's room, as we have a kid too on the way. The stairs leading up there can only be accessed through the nursery and cut through our bedroom right over the head of our bed. Footsteps are very obvious. It was lunchtime and my wife was in the bedroom with our cats, taking her lunch break. I was in the kitchen feeding Kid 1 in her high chair. From where I was standing, I could see 3 doors: our bedroom, the basement, and the nursery. The nursery has this bifold, slatted door that folds open and closed. It was partially open because the gentleman working upstairs hadn't closed it the last time he passed through. A noise drew my attention to the nursery door. It was being jostled, and I could see it slightly shudder in place. As I watched the door slowly closed, at first I assumed the worker had quietly closed the door from the other side, but I hadn't seen him walk in. Thinking I had been preoccupied, I opened the door and stood at the bottom of the steps and listened for the sounds of him moving around. I heard no sounds indicating anyone was upstairs at all. I checked back on Kid 1, then went to my wife to ask her if she had heard anyone go upstairs. She said she had, so I wrote everything off as me not paying enough attention to my surroundings and went back to feeding my kid. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and the worker came in, opened the door to the nursery and walked upstairs. I was surprised as I thought he was, already upstairs. I followed him up and found him. I asked if there was anyone else with him and was given a nope. So I apologised for bothering him and left. Don't know what happened there, but it sure seems like that door closed on its own. So lately, he likes to play this game called Ghosts, with these little Halloween toys. Sometimes he asks me questions about what ghosts are, but I haven't really gone into much detail since he's only 4, but usually just vaguely describe it without scaring him. I should preface this by saying there have been some strange occurrences in the past, with him pointing at the corner asking about who that man is, or I'll find him just talking to someone and there's never anyone there. Anyway, we were playing again and he wanted to play Ghosts again. As we started, I asked him, "Do you remember what ghosts are?" And he nodded. And then he asked me, "Can you be the black man ghost?" Which took me so off guard. Then he continued to say, "The black man scare me." At first it was shocking because he's not been brought up in a racist home, and you don't even understand racism at that age. So once I realised, he continued pleading, "Can you be the black man? Black man scares me." And I just said, "Wow, nephew, I didn't expect you to say that at all. How about we play another game for now?" And he kept pleading, "Be the black man, please." And then I said, "Hey, let's go on a drive," since he loves doing that, just to get his mind off it. And I didn't even know how to process what he had just said, and didn't even know how to respond. So he fell asleep in the ride, and I think next time we play, I'm going to play the black man and ask him what he looks like. How does he talk? Does he wear a hat, etc.? Questions like that he can understand. Maybe it will reveal more. When I was his age, I was also visited by shadow people. I pray he isn't going through that though. My grandmother and her husband owned a grocery store called C&J Grocery. About 3 weeks before he vanished, Donald, they called him Don, who was an employee at their grocery store, showed up at my grandma's house while her husband was at work. It was in the late afternoon around 5, unannounced. He was in his early 20s and worked as a cashier. My grandma made him coffee and she had Jimmy Swaggart on the TV. They started talking about religion. Apparently, he confessed to her that he believed he was possessed by a demon. My grandma asked why he thought he was, and he only said, "Something happened, and it's inside." He stayed for about an hour, and then left that evening before my grandma's husband returned home. almost like he was afraid or sensed that he'd be home soon. My grandma told her husband about the visit, and before even mentioning the possession thing, he told her that he never wants him to come over again, and to never let him inside. He got very angry that he was even there, which he rarely got angry about. He said there was something wrong with him. My grandma was confused because he was always pleasant with her and she liked him as an employee. Nothing romantic. Her husband told her that at work, his personality would change depending on what person he was dealing with. He couldn't describe fully how he'd change, only that sometimes he'd get very angry with random, usually religious customers, and that his voice would change and there was just something off about him. His eyes would turn black, and then suddenly he'd be back to normal like nothing happened. He was angry that he even came into the house and wasn't religious himself until my grandma converted him later. 3 weeks later, he didn't show up to work. He had never missed a day. He never came for his check. He never called. They never heard from him again. Called the police. My grandma came with the police to his house. She said his house was perfectly clean, immaculate even. Everything was in its right place, and it was like he had thoroughly cleansed his house. He lived alone. He had a red car which was gone. His wallet was there and basically all of his belongings were still there, including a suitcase in his closet. No one ever saw or heard from him again, and that's all I know. The cleanliness of the house makes me think suicide, but they never found his car or ever found anything connected to him, and everyone just kind of moved on. My grandma said he was super sweet and very, very attractive, in an almost hypnotic way. She's always wondered what happened to him. He only showed up at her house once. She felt like he was trying to tell her something but couldn't get it all out, like something was preventing him. Anyway, that's all I know. Maybe someone can help me track down a missing 20-something from Maryland and vanished and worked at a grocery store called C&J. If you have any questions, let me know. The whole story just creeped me out. Just thought maybe someone on her, by some stretch of possibility, knew this person or knew the disappearance. It's just sticking in my mind. Everything in the house that me or my family has experienced was heavy and consistent, almost like one entity after the other. For a while, it didn't happen. We just hear the occasional set of footsteps, see an odd shadow here or there, etc. But recently, this month and a half, I've been seeing figures here and there in the house, and I'm the only one that sees them. A couple of days ago, my family was cleaning the laundry room of the basement, and once we were done, I had seen this man seemingly crawl out of the storage space underneath the stairs on his stomach. It wasn't a full view, but I could make out his facial expression, his head, and that he was lying down. It was as if he was pleased with the fact that I saw him, and at the same time drunk or high in a way that made him look too happy. That same day, my mum and grandma had left to take the dog out to the farm. We live in the city and parks here are small, and I was cleaning out cupboards in the kitchen. When I was finished and just standing up, I heard an older man in the living room burp really loudly, almost as if he was drunk. I knew I was the only one upstairs, since if you were to come up from the basement, you'd have to pass through the kitchen to get anywhere else, and my brother didn't pass me at all. Almost a week ago, I had left my room to feed my cat. My mum and grandma had left to go pick up my younger brothers up from their dad's place. And my brother was downstairs. When I went to go back to my room, I saw this white figure standing down the hall with no head. It wasn't like a human figure, but rather what looked like twisted, sharp bones bent at an odd angle. It spooked me since it was standing right outside my room, and I knew I was the only one upstairs. This last week was my friend's birthday, and I was making her a cake. I'd gone downstairs to grab food colouring for the cake that I had made, and when I was downstairs, I saw a figure looking at me through the gap in the door that separates the main part of the basement to the laundry room. The gap itself is pretty wide, and I saw this pure black figure standing so close to the door that I was able to make out the texture of its hair. There was no facial features, and I was so scared since it was less than a foot away from me. I ran to get my brother. His room is in the laundry room itself, and made him stand with me until I gathered everything I needed. Every time that I ask my family if they see these figures, they always tell me no, or say something similar. I'm not sure why anyone else can see figures I'm seeing, or why I'm seeing these ones in the first place. Usually, we have a lot of things happen in our house, like noises, footsteps, shadow people, apparitions, etc. Feels like I've seen them all, and I've grown kind of used to them, but I still get spooked when I see something. The other day, I was home alone, and I was cleaning up around the house before my family got back. Everything was going fine, and I was almost done. I just had to grab a new clean tea towel to dry the dishes. And as I went to grab one from the closet in the hall, I saw this masked thing standing in the middle of the hall, right where my mum's and my room met, staring. It was a few inches taller than I was. I'm 5'2". It had this oval white mask with black marks for eyes, a mouth and nose. Was wearing a black cloak and this red shawl with orange and yellow patterns on it. It spooked me, and I wondered if it was part of my imagination. I saw it again the day after, when I was cleaning again, and I came back up from the basement with my laundry, and I placed it down on the kitchen floor. As I was getting my water bottle, I saw it again in the living room, looking at me. It never makes any noise, doesn't seem to get too close to me, and I never seemed threatened by it. Just spooks me to see it so close or staring at me. I'm not sure why it's here, or how it got to my house, and all I can do is pray, smudge, burn incense, and hope that it goes away. So far it hasn't gone, and I'm not sure what it wants from me, or if it's even trying to tell me something. I bake a lot when the kitchen is free, and I plug in my earbuds and listen to my music. My whole family noticed weird thumping and banging noises coming from the attic area. That's right outside my room, but that's not important. And we all couldn't explain the noises. When I was almost done baking the cookies I was making, I started hearing the thumping noises. At first, I thought it was my music, so I turned it down. A few minutes later, I heard it again, and I paused whatever I was listening to. Not long after, I heard it again, and thought my mum and grandma had come back from grocery shopping. I waited for them to open the back door so I could help bring the bags in. They didn't open the door. I felt like I was being watched, and I'm always creeped out by that feeling, so I'm looking all over the place to find the source. I tried to see if it was my dog or cats, but couldn't see them anywhere. I looked towards the hallway/attic area and see this thing peeking from the hall into the kitchen at me, smiling. It was freaky to look at, with pure white skin that was kind of greyed at the fingertips, pure black eyes with no reflection source, stringy light brown hair and a yellow teeth. It scared me so much that I ran down to the basement, where I didn't go unless someone came with me to get my brother. He came up with me until my mum and grandma got back, and sat in the kitchen with me until I was done baking. During the whole time, we kept hearing the thumping noises and asked if one of us was making them. We'd give each other looks every time we heard them, but nothing happened. Every so often, I see this thing staring or peeking out at me whenever I'm in the kitchen. It doesn't try to speak or make other noises, and it never gets too close to me. But it just stands there, smiling and watching me. It's short but taller than I am, I'm 5'2", and tends to follow me wherever I go. I saw it about 30 minutes out of town at a friend's place a week back. I don't know what it wants, or why it's following or watching me. I'm not into witchcraft or summoning spirits, and none of my family members are into that or played with a Ouija board. All it does is watch me, smile at me, sometimes even chase me. When I was pregnant, my father and I stayed at his cousin's house for about a month before we moved into our apartment. It's an old farmhouse in a newly developed area of Warwick, Rhode Island. There are farms and woods in one direction and a small town in the other. We were told when we moved in that the house had been built in the mid-1800s, which to me was super interesting until my kid's father, I'll call him Brian, remarked at how the stairs seemed awfully dark and creepy for the middle of the day, and when I looked, he was right. It gave off such a sinister vibe. We slept in the living room and at nights could see through the kitchen, and it was as if the stairs became a dark, uncomfortable void. When we brought this up to Brian's cousin and his wife, they proceeded to laugh and tell us stories of people being pushed down the stairs. I don't think they believed in ghosts, and the husband was an abusive drunk and drug addict, so they had enough problems, clearly. That house was chaotic. The husband and wife clearly were having serious issues, emotionally and financially. They had a 6-year-old son who was afraid to sleep upstairs by himself because the shadows scared him. Great. After being in the house alone a couple times and seeing genuine human figures out of the corner of my eye, or even better, black dots on the floor that looked like long spindly legs running, but when you'd look them straight on, would disappear. A few times I'd see a figure out of the corner of my eye, look and see one of the family members who I hadn't heard come in. I think that freaked me out the most, because how can you explain to yourself seeing a person and sometimes nothing being there, but other times you expect it to disappear, but would in fact be a person standing there this time? So weird. Brian would say how sitting in one chair in the living room, you'd want to look over your shoulder into the doorway, as if someone was coming down a set of stairs that used to be there. This also freaks me out, considering I slept right near the doorway and often would get a feeling of someone coming toward me. One day, me and Brian were the only two in the entire house, facing one another about 2 feet away face to face, talking loud as we usually do. Directly in the middle of us, heard a woman's voice say, "Shh." I asked if he had said that, and he stared at me with huge eyes and asked, "No, did you?" Then we laughed it off as we were clearly talking too loud for the inhabitants, apparently. We eventually brought this up to the family, who included a second cousin living upstairs, and they confirmed they too saw and felt things. They told us they assumed the black voids that ran on the floor were just one of their dogs and ignored it if it wasn't. The cousin who lived upstairs said the curtains to his closet often moved, like they were being pushed, but he choked it up to being stoned or tired. There was no breeze. The wife told me when they first moved there, her son would see a man in a hat, but assumed it was his imagination. How could you live in a house so clearly haunted and just pass it off? The front of the house at night was avoided by basically everyone, as it was right where it felt like someone was walking by the doorframe at you in the living room. One night, I didn't feel like walking all the way round this huge house to the car, so I walked as fast as I could to the car through the front door. I heard a deep growling coming from the side of the house. They owned 3 dogs, one of which was a bull mastiff. Too freaked out to call for her, I ran in, and to my horror, all 3 dogs were in the house. Needless to say, I didn't use that entrance again. It was such an emotionally depressing house, and maybe me being pregnant, I was just more aware of everything. There were other weird things, but one of the last conversations I had with one of the roommates renting a back bedroom, it was down a long hall at the very end, the only door in this isolated hallway. I told her about me and Brian hearing "shh" directly in the middle of us. She explained she heard the same exact thing in the hallway. If she and her son were getting loud, but was sure it was the owner's young son sneaking into the hallway. I'm not so sure. My story is when I first started dating my now husband. I'll refer to him as B. We were both 20, and his parents had asked that we stay over at their house to house sit while they were away on vacation for a few days. I readily agreed because I knew they'd have no problem with me bringing my dog. They paid for food and brought groceries and lived closer to town than I do. So I was happy, even when B had to work, since I wasn't working. It sounded super relaxing. First night went smoothly. Typical night. We had pizza and watched a movie, and went to bed early because it was Sunday, and B worked early the next day. I had a nightmare that night, but couldn't remember it when I woke up. So it made me anxious, but I couldn't put my finger on why. My dog Abby is an ESA, now retired since I have an SD. And so she did her thing and was immensely helpful. I cleaned some, did some laundry for my mother-in-law since she was behind and just hung out. I got a call midday that B's cousin was dropping her dog off. There was a disagreement between her and her parents, and the dog was going to live with my in-laws from now on. Cool, I love the dog, Oakley. More than happy to take him in for them early. B came home and all was well. My in-laws have an entertainment system and bar in their basement, so we decided to go downstairs to watch our favourite shows for the night. My Abigail went down fine, but Oakley wouldn't go downstairs. Plain refused at the top of the stairs. He was so freaked out about the situation, he started shaking harder than I've ever seen a dog shake. He was petrified. I finally told B that we would just stay upstairs. It was no big deal. As we ate, I started thinking about how Abby never lets her guard down in the basement. She would face the bathroom they had down there and never leave my side. She would stand in front of me, and a few times she even growled. But it's an old house, so I figured it was nothing. I went to sleep that night and I had the most real and terrifying nightmare I've ever had in my life, still to this day. I was laying in the bed I had fallen asleep in. I looked up and then at the wall across from me, and it was there. It was this black thing, and it smelled like death and tar. Extremely tall, bending in the middle to not hit its head. Its proportions were wrong, arms too long, legs too short and angled awkwardly. It had long black hair that looked wet with how it clumped together. Black holes for eyes with blue lips. It was veiny and made an awkward sucking noise when it breathed. It had dull and sharp teeth, almost like some were broken. The worst part was its limp. It made a thud and dragging noise while it walked towards me laughing. Not a booming laugh, but an internal laugh. Like when you're trying to not show someone you're laughing. Yet its maniacal smile gave it away. He was excited and I was scared. I started trying to scream. I woke up and he was still there, still coming towards me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe and was sobbing. I kept trying to scream, but it felt like I had a piano laying on my chest. Oakley came running from the living room and let out a huge snarl. I finally screamed, and I was so frantic I screamed for my mom, since I thought I couldn't get my husband's attention. He flew up and turned his side table light and looked at me. It was gone. I honestly felt like I had just skirted my death. I called Oakley up on the bed, who was crying now, and tried to get closer to me. He laid in my lap and essentially hugged me. My husband checked the entire house armed with a bat. He found my poor Abby locked in a bathroom, crying and howling. She had been with Oakley when we went to sleep, so I'm not sure why or how she got locked in there. Once let out, she came and immediately checked me out and traded places with Oakley. Oakley then went to look around with my husband. He checked everywhere with him, except the basement. He again refused to go down. So my husband did a quick check and found no one down there. When he came downstairs, I explained I had to leave. I had to get away from that house for a while. I took the dogs and we went on an early morning food run. And we drove for a bit. It was snowing like crazy and probably not my best idea, but I still felt safer than I had at the house. I did end up going back. The next night was my last night, so I just didn't sleep and stayed on the couch with the dogs laying on or near me. I've never been so happy to leave somewhere. I no longer house sit for them, and they've heard the story. I'm fine visiting for a few hours, but I can't do any more than that. I still feel watched and stalked. You would think his parents might find me nutty, but the worst part of the whole thing is that when I told them, they weren't surprised. They knew exactly what I was talking about. So me and my mum left the house, and we had gotten prescription sunglasses when we got new glasses, so I grabbed them and left. When I got back, the case they came on was on the floor. My mum had to help my dad move some plywood from his truck to the shed he's building, so she wanted to borrow a pair of my tennis shoes because hers fell apart in the washer. So of course I obliged and go to my room to look for them. I usually only wear 3 pairs of shoes. My Converse, my winter boots, and my flip-flops. My Converse for months had been sitting on the floor in my room, in front of my TV. Of course, they weren't there when I went to grab them. So I'm frantically looking around because I know damn well I left them out in the open. I even looked in my closet. Where were they? A shoe organizer in my closet that only holds shoes that I don't wear. So at least the ghost was nice enough to put them away for me, I guess. I decided to go up there and help my parents. It was super early in the morning at like 6 a.m, so it was still dark out. I was holding a flashlight so my parents could see where they were walking. While they were going back to his truck, I could hear tapping behind me coming from the forest. Now I know what you're thinking, that it was a bird or other animal just doing its thing, and normally I'd agree. But this tapping sounded different. It was too slow and too quiet, despite being right behind me. It didn't sound like an animal. Do you remember how I was smelling my dead nanny's perfume? I smelled it again. Me and my mum were cleaning off my ceiling fan so we could switch the flow, so that it only circulates the air instead of creating cool air for winter. We have to clean it, otherwise all the dust will fall when you turn it on. We finished cleaning it and were standing in front of my door with the fan on, trying to figure out which way it was blowing, when I started smelling her perfume. My mom was standing right next to me, so of course I asked if she could smell it, and she couldn't. I mentioned that my parents aren't the best. My dad is controlling, scary, and verbally abusive to me and my mom, while my mom is all of those things and physically abusive to me. Everything came to a head a while ago. My mom threatened to kill me. It was the last straw, so I moved in with my sister, but I had to wait a bit while my sister worked things out and got ready for me. So for about a week, I had to wait. This is when I first heard the voice and experienced sleep paralysis for the first time. My mom heard the voice first, but couldn't understand what it said. I finally heard it. I was laying in bed, struggling to fall asleep. I have really bad insomnia, so this is very common for me. I noticed this weird shadow in my room at the foot of my bed, so I sat up, trying to figure out what was causing it, when I heard a raspy feminine voice whisper, "Don't go." I lost my shit and started screaming for my mom. I knew it wasn't her, but I just couldn't even fathom walking past it. She burst into the room and is like, "What the fuck are you screaming about?" I told her what happened and we both stayed up and watched a movie. I ended up passing out on the couch and my mom went to her room. So fun fact about me, it's extremely rare for me to fall asleep in anything other than a bed. I've probably done it like 5 times in my life. While I was sleeping on the couch, I abruptly woke up to what sounded like twigs breaking. I assume I'm dreaming, because why would there be twigs in my living room, right? For the last year or so, when I have to walk through the dark-ass living room, I've been imagining this specific figure just sitting there in the dark. Y'all know the Asian squat? It's doing that, but it's completely covered in one of those camo blanket things that has twigs and stuff on it, and you can't see anything but its eyes. And they're terrifying. I've been picturing it, how do I explain it? So there's a living room doorway, right? With the TV right in front of it, up against the wall, so you can't see the screen. There's this little corner of the wall right next to the entertainment centre, and that's where I pictured it crouched. God, I'm getting freaked out just reading this out. I was always too scared to check if something was there or not. I didn't mention this thing in my other posts because I just assumed it was my sleep-deprived mind making shit up. But I saw it in what I thought was my dream. I couldn't move though, and this thing was standing instead of crouching down, and it was fucking huge. It was at least 7 feet tall, and I knew instantly that I wasn't dreaming, that this was real, and was the thing I heard in my room. It limped towards me, every step sounding like it was walking through a forest. It got so close to me that I could faintly see its face that was in the shadows of its weird forest blanket. The closest thing I can describe it is the monsters from the Doctor Who episode, The Waters of Mars. But if their mouth area was their whole face and white with black cracks. Its pupils were white with black where the whites of its eyes should have been, and they were huge, and its mouth was wide open in a silent scream, and I was basically pissing myself in fear. And then it whispered without opening its mouth, "Don't go." And then it was gone. I stayed frozen in that position out of fear for at least an hour. I've never in my life been so fucking scared, and I've almost died many times. I think that I might have been right about the shadow person being my dead neighbour. I think that he was protecting me in my room and maybe having fun while doing so. Nothing in my room ever really scared me other than the Scooby-Doo doll. I think that the thing wanted me out of my room to fuck with me, and maybe it doesn't have power in there. I think that when me and my mom started wanting to leave, that's when it started making itself known. I want to say it's somehow tied to the forest because of its appearance, but I honestly can't say for sure. I saw the thing occasionally in the days before I left. We have a medicine cabinet mirror in the bathroom, so I opened it to grab the toothpaste, and in true horror movie fashion, when I closed it, I saw the thing staring back at me. I turned around, but it was gone. I saw it crouched where I pictured it was once when I was playing RDR2 in the living room. It was just sitting there, watching me. This one is kind of funny to me, but once I went outside to check on 2 of our stray cats, and the thing was sitting in the driver's seat of my mum's car. Like, of all the places. I moved into my sister's place, and for a while, things were quiet. I was focused on getting settled and finding my first job. But on the 6th night, I believe, I had sleep paralysis again. It was like the time I saw just the shadow of it, but now I could see the figure standing, still wearing the weird blanket. It slowly climbed up on my bed and over me, and got really close to my face again. This time it whispered, "You left," like it was a question. I didn't know what to do, so I couldn't answer. Did this thing really prevent me from talking and then ask me a question? I felt its hands wrap around my neck as it yelled in my face, "You left," over and over, for what felt like an eternity. I think I ended up passing out from not being able to breathe. The troubling thing is that I woke up with no marks on my neck. Ever since that night, I've had variations of the same thing. It shows up at the foot of the bed, either climbs on me or walks around to me, and either yells or whispers in an almost hurt tone that I left. What do you guys think this is? Is it all in my head? I know this doesn't sound believable in the slightest, and I'm honestly having trouble believing it myself. I've got no fucking clue what to do. Call a priest? Check myself into the psych ward? God, this whole thing is so exhausting. I'm just so drained of energy and happiness that I'm just spiraling into a depression, and I don't know how to stop it. I thought moving out would be the best for me, but now I'm suffering even more than I was with my parents. I'm honestly debating going back. What should I do? Just 3 days ago, me and my friend went up to Walmart. There's this pavement trail up by my neighbourhood basketball court, and all of a sudden, 3 people almost practically materialised in front of us. We thought nothing of it at first, as the trail is commonly taken. However, upon closer inspection, the people looked just like our 3 friends, down to an exact point. Normally I would have no problem with this, however one of the friends had gone to Georgia, and the others were at their house. Around this point, we got creeped out, but oh well, might as well keep going. We get about halfway up the trail, and one of our friends' voices calls out. the voice being exact in cadence, tone, you name it. This is where things get weirder. Me and my friend both turned to each other and asked if that was really our friend. From there, we braced ourselves for a silly jump scare and turned the corner of the trail, and they were gone. We kept going and saw them again, this time in a Home Goods parking lot on the way there. We were able to get a good look at them as we were far enough away to not be detected, but close enough to get details. I saw one of them, our younger friend of the group, was standing at an angle. I checked his face for identifiable features, but there was no face. I mean, like there were no features whatsoever on his face. It mortified me. The others turned around a little bit at the same angle as they were preparing to get to the next part of the trail that led directly to Walmart. Their faces were all contorted. I mean, like a physically impossible kind of contortion. Then I realized they were following a particular pathway we followed about a month ago. I mean, down to foot placement, people placement, everything. They rounded the corner and we followed not far behind. They were gone. Entirely gone. I mean, no trace, nothing. Like they didn't exist. I brought this up with one of the friends we supposedly encountered, and she freaked out. She was more freaked out by the fact that them taking the trail meant they were nearby than anything else. It's sort of become a taboo topic, but I don't think they followed me home. Just today, I was taking out the garbage, and down through this alleyway, there was a voice speaking to me. It was that same friend's voice, but just ever so noticeably, yet slightly distorted. I turned, and there were 3 figures shrouded in shadow. Their outlines were the same as those very friends I had encountered. Needless to say, I finished taking out the trash at lightning speed. I don't really see this as anything extreme right now. I'm more just looking for closure on what happened. I don't need anything immediately right now, but if anyone has an answer, and I know someone does, please let me know.